Good morning, children. I know that many of you love to hear stories about brave knights and daring adventures, but today I want to tell you about a real live American hero. And don't think that there aren't any adventures in his story. There are plenty. I am going to tell you about a man named Abraham Lincoln. Now, Abraham Lincoln was not born into riches and power. He wasn't even born into a very nice house. When he was just a baby, his father died. So his mother and he and his two brothers lived together in a little cabin on a farm. Now, his mother chopped wood and cooked meals and did all the things that needed to be done. And Lincoln and his brothers worked hard to help her. They chopped wood and cleared fields and fenced in cattle. It was hard work, but Abraham Lincoln never complained. And he didn't have much time for complaining because he was always eager to learn. He would sit on a log and teach himself from books that he had found. Later on, when he grew older and was able to work for wages, he saved every penny he could so that he could buy more books. Abraham Lincoln wanted to be a lawyer, and while it isn't easy to become a lawyer in general, it was especially hard back then. You see, back then there were no schools where you could go to study law, so what Lincoln did was to read all the books about the law that he could find. And after studying and preparing, he took a test to become a lawyer without ever having gone to school. Can you imagine? So now that you know how hard Abraham Lincoln worked, I bet you won't be surprised to hear that he became one of the best lawyers in his state. But being one of the best lawyers in his state didn't make him famous throughout the whole country. Well, that was about to change. Not long after Lincoln married a woman named Mary Todd and began raising a family. His law practice was going well, and he was respected by everyone who knew him. Then one day, everything changed. You see, at this time, the United States was split over slavery. The southern states wanted to keep allowing people to own other human beings, but the northern states wanted to stop slavery. Now, normally, if two sides can't agree about something, they talk about it and try to find a compromise. But these two sides couldn't find a compromise, and pretty soon the country was divided into two opposing teams, the Confederates and the Union. The Confederates wanted to leave the Union and form their own country where slavery would be allowed. And as you might have guessed, Abraham Lincoln was on the side that wanted to keep the country together and end slavery. Well, the two sides argued and argued until finally the Confederates attacked a fort called Fort Sumter. When this happened, President Abraham Lincoln told everyone that he was calling for soldiers to put down this rebellion. That's when Abraham Lincoln became famous throughout the entire country. Some people cheered for him, and other people who were on the other side of the slavery argument were furious. Even though Lincoln was only 6 feet tall and looked like he might be weak and skinny, he had one of the biggest voices in the country. He traveled all around the North, meeting with people and arguing against slavery. People listened to him and loved his arguments so much that he became famous. Soon everyone knew his name, and when someone said the name Lincoln, everyone knew that he meant honesty, bravery, and courage. And then came the day when he was chosen to be President of the United States. Do you remember that song that I used to sing to you about a humble man who became president? Well, that was about Abraham Lincoln. After he became president, Lincoln met with leaders from the South to try to find a compromise about slavery. But when those meetings failed, he did the only thing that he could do. He fought to preserve the Union. As the war went on, more and more people began to turn against slavery. And finally, Abraham Lincoln stood in front of a crowd of people and announced that all people, black and white, were created equal. By the end of the war, the Union had won and slavery was no longer allowed in the United States. But sadly, just a few months later, Lincoln was shot by an assassin. There are many reasons why Abraham Lincoln is an American hero. First of all, he believed in the idea that all men are created equal, and he fought for those beliefs even when it was hard. Secondly, he showed us that we shouldn't judge others by their appearance. Even though he looked weak and skinny, he had an enormous amount of strength inside. Finally, Abraham Lincoln shows us that we should never, ever give up hope, because no matter how difficult the situation seems, If we work hard and stay true to ourselves, we can overcome anything. In honor of Abraham Lincoln, the United States celebrates his birthday as a national holiday. Schools are closed and people all over the country take the day to celebrate Abraham Lincoln and remember his contributions to the United States. Would you like to hear some of his words? Of course you do. Let me tell you one of my favorites. If you only read the first word of each sentence, you will find a powerful message. Each word starts with the next letter of the alphabet. A is for ambition. B is for boldness. C is for courage. D is for determination. Effort makes. Faith brings. Gallantry inspires, honesty compels, industry creates, justice obtains, courage animates, perseverance redirects, quietism subdues, righteousness exalts. You know, I sometimes think that when Abraham Lincoln was speaking to crowds of people, he must have had the gift of making words dance before your eyes. He could say simple things and make them sound so beautiful and powerful. I want to share with you one of his most famous speeches. It's called the Gettysburg Address. 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation, or any nation, so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it, far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note, nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from this earth. Abraham Lincoln truly believed in equality for all people and freedom for all nations. Although his life was filled with sadness and tragedy, he still chose to see the good in others. He never gave up hope that our country would become a better place for everyone. And although he is no longer with us, his wisdom and his example continue to inspire us. And now it's time for bed. Before you close your eyes, remember Abraham Lincoln, the man who dared to dream that all people could be equal and free. Dream that dream with him and let it come true. Good night.